Recording has started.
Fantastic. Great. All right. Hello, welcome to Create Connect's webinar. This is a funding information session for regionally based New South Wales applicants. My name's Jesse. I'm from the Regional Arts and Funding Development team here at Create New South Wales, and I'll be your facilitator. So thanks for joining this webinar. Today, we'll be looking at a case study of a successful Create New South Wales funding application. The session is designed to provide advice from a successful applicant who has been through this whole process and has a few tips up their sleeve. So thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all gathering on today. Create New South Wales acknowledges the Aboriginal people across the state and their continued connection to their lands, waters and culture. We respect elders past, present and emerging and the role that Aboriginal artists play in contributing to their culture. So the Arts and Cultural Funding Program is offered across 4 categories. That is project funding for individuals and groups, creative career project funding for organisations, and annual program funding for organisations. We also have a small project grant, which is a quick response grant, which is open throughout the majority of the year. The projects and creative career rounds support innovation, vibrancy and creativity within the New South Wales arts and cultural sector. Funding is available for up to $60,000 towards a range of arts and cultural activities, such as new project development or presentation, research, professional development, community and audience engagement. The annual organisation funding is provided on an annual basis to support arts and cultural organisations, including service organisations, to deliver multiple arts and cultural activities to diverse audiences throughout a single calendar year or fiscal year, and it's for funding amounts of up to $200,000. The guidelines for all these grants can be found on the Create New South Wales website, and I always suggest to first-time applicants and everyone who's thinking about applying really to have a thorough read of them before applying. We really encourage you to contact Create New South Wales if you're unsure of anything, even if it's a small question. We're always happy to help, and the information about how to get in contact will be on the last slide today. So today I'm joined by prize-winning poet Sarah Temporal, founder of Poets Out Loud. Poets Out Loud empowers voices of all ages through inclusive cultural projects and performances. Hello and welcome, Sarah, and thank you for sharing your experience in putting together a grant application. Firstly, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organisation?
Thanks, Jesse. It's great to be here. I am a performance poet and a writer. I have always loved performing poetry for a live audience, and what I do now in my work through Poets Out Loud is extend that opportunity to diverse regional voices of all ages. I live and work on the Bundjalung lands of regional northern New South Wales, the north coast of New South Wales, and I have my first poetry collection coming out next year. And I actually started Poets Out Loud with my winnings from a big performance poetry prize here in the Northern Rivers in 2019.
Oh, so fantastic, Sarah. Thank you again for joining us. Perhaps you want to share a little bit more about this project that you received funding for, and what was it all about?
Sure. I received an arts and cultural funding grant for the Poets Out Loud Youth Slam. It's a project I initiated back in 2020, right after I had a baby somehow. I don't know how I managed to pull that off, but anyway, here we are 4 years later. The project aims to empower young voices in my regional community through slam poetry. So we have professional performance poets, including myself, delivering workshops for young people aged 12 to 18 across the Northern Rivers in preparation for a youth poetry slam performance. And that performance is held as part of the Byron Writers Festival. It's called the Poets Out Loud Youth Slam, and we showcase a selection of those young voices, and those young people are mentored one-on-one by us in the lead up to the performance. So this funding was for phase 1 of the project, which is the workshops in schools and community.
Wow, how fantastic. That sounds like such a great project. How did you go about preparing the application, and what was the process? What was this whole experience like for you putting together an application?
I was pretty fortunate in that I had run the same project with obviously a different cohort of participants in the 2 years prior. And so I had started the project with the creative team and a very small amount of funding and got it off the ground and built support from there. So by the time I came to do the application for the 2022 program, I was able to really break down the larger aims of the project into those discrete phases, phase 1, 2, and 3. And that really helped to know exactly where the funding would be going and how we could deliver the project in the 6 month time frame, which was available in the funding round that year. I had support from my local council, and I also had the performance event programmed on the Byron Writers Festival. So that gave a clear outcome for the work that we would be doing, and that was independently funded. So it was, I guess, really clear how this phase of the program would feed into a pre existing outcome.
Yeah,
Um,
fantastic. So you had the outcomes sort
yeah.
of already, ready to go, essentially.
That's right, yeah, and so then it was just a matter of calling in those relationships that I already had with the festival and, the local council and other supporters, getting those letters of support in, nice and early, and spending a lot of time with the budget, because I find that that's the one aspect of a project plan that you really can't rush, and it won't come through at the last minute. But if I spend a lot of time nutting out the artist fees, the insurance, the venue hire, all those different little nuts and bolts, then I'm also really confident that if I'm successful in the funding, I'm going to be able to pick up that project plan and deliver it just as I've outlined in the budget.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think that's probably a really good point. I know that a lot of artists, myself included, a budget does not come naturally. So I think, definitely having ample time to devote to that section of an application is probably a really pertinent point. Um, Sarah, now that you've come out of the other side of the application, were there any tips that you would offer first-time applicants before, they're about to embark on this process?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's really all about building up those long term relationships. And so, if it was my first time going for funding or the first time I'd run a project, I would really be, putting in a lot of time with meeting the people that are going to support the project. For me, that was, partner organizations in my local area, the local council, also the organisation that I invited to auspice the project, because these are the people who can really give you great advice on putting together a strong application and suggesting the ways that you can support each other and the ways that your project might also enhance the outcomes that they are working towards. Um, yeah, and I've mentioned, the budget, which is such an unnatural place for arts people to be sitting with a spreadsheet. But I really found that on the other side of it, that process is actually quite affirming because it's about putting a dollar value on the sort of intangible outcomes that we're working with all the time. And so, if we have young people who come through a process of mentoring, who enter into a career in creative arts before they've even left school and connect with local professional artists who are doing that in their region, all of those outcomes are wonderful, but that also values the work that we do. So, get to love your budgets. Yeah.
Absolutely, and lean on those people around you that have trodden that path before and are able to point you in the right direction. I think that's a really salient tip. One thing I wanted to ask Sarah was, were there any sort of pressure points when you were putting the application together? And I know often there are, and I'm interested to know if how you overcame these sticking points, if there were
Yeah.
any.
I guess time is often a pressure point and particularly for artists like me who are working independently of an organisation. So there's, trying to avoid that last minute rush of getting the application in. And something that I find helps is when you are asking for the letters of support, to just give a bit of a suggested template or some examples of what might go into that letter with the specific details of the support that that organisation or that person might offer. Really makes it a lot easier for them to flick that back with lots of time in advance. Um, Also, I think the biggest pressure point I found with this application was the questions around um, art form development or audience development, or something around whether the outcomes are in the nature of participation or in audience. And that was complicated for this project because we're dealing with young people, we're going out into schools. We actually connected with over 500 young people in our workshops through this phase, but they were both participants and audience. And so looking into those questions really gave me the chance to consider where we're making the biggest impact, or in other words, what would happen if we weren't there. Um, and So that allowed us to, talk about how we're increasing the participation of youth voices in the regional arts, and just to really look at where we're making the biggest change.
Fantastic. I think that's a really good point. Thanks, Sarah. So within our funding rounds, applications are assessed, as you know, against 3 assessment criteria, which are the merit, the impact, and the viability, which is the budget section. I was hoping that you might just walk us through your project's merit, the merit section, and perhaps if there's any handy hints that you can offer that sort of describe the project, with a focus on presenting an attention-grabbing rationale, or how you went about expressing the contribution to your chosen art form, as you've just been discussing.
Sure. So the merit section of my application basically looked at um, the creative team, our track record of working with young people and the community previously, um, and what we're aiming for this project. So I wrote that Poets Out Loud is a collective of artists convened by myself, prize winning poets and educators. And in our 3rd year of operation, we established strong relationships with local government, business, and schools in the region, allowing us to help increase the participation of diverse youth voices in the regional arts. And so the way that I backed that up was to give creative examples. Now, we were lucky because we had run the Youth Slam previously and we had video and photographic examples up on our website. But if I hadn't had that, I would also look at our credentials for education and facilitation work and evidence of the audience that we have already established in the region.
Yeah, fantastic. And just sort of getting into the nitty-gritty of that, what type of support material did you include in your application to help to substantiate that merit?
So I included links to YouTube videos of our previous Youth Slam performance. There were short 3-minute clips. I included the website where we sign up and engage participants. I included CVs or bios from each of the contributing artists. So that's the 3 performance poets. What else? In the past, I've also used testimonials from parents and teachers of students that we have worked with, testimonials from previous participants themselves, and we get some really wonderful feedback, like a teenager saying this whole experience opened her eyes to the world of poetry, and now she doesn't want to go back. Um,
Fantastic.
yeah, yeah,
Wow. And letters of support, as you mentioned earlier. I'm
that's right.
assuming that, there was a couple of those in there somewhere.
That's right. Letters of support from the festival programming the event, from the local council community development team who were funding and supporting, and from anyone who's helping me to promote the event, as well as the creative team, so the other
Yeah.
poets. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Incredible. Great. So the second assessment criteria that we have is the impact section. Can you share how you describe the outcomes of your project? I know you talked earlier that this has been an event that had already happened, which is obviously really helpful in how you substantiate the work that you're proposing. But yeah, how did you describe the outcomes of the project, or the engagement, the audience numbers, the diversity and inclusion strategies, etc.?
Sure. Well, this is a bit of a long list, so feel free to stop me if it's getting repetitive. But I looked at the outcomes in different ways. So there's, I guess, the quantitative outcomes like audience numbers, and the qualitative outcomes in terms of the experience that we offered these young people, and those kind of intangible outcomes that we talk about all the time in the arts. It contributes to well-being and so many other factors of our lives. So, firstly, I did feedback surveys. I gave these to the teachers who hosted our workshops in their schools. And in the workshops themselves, we get the students to raise their hands at the start and the end of the session to indicate how confident they are with poetry. And from that, we count the number of hands, and we can actually measure that there was about a 72% increase in feeling more confident after the workshop, that they can use poetry to express themselves and what matters to them.
Wow,
Um,
that's a really smart methodology. Yeah, that's fantastic.
it's great because it's really quick and in the moment, but it still leads to that quantitative outcome.
Yeah,
The teachers reported back on being, highly likely to book our workshops again. And again, on those forms, we're able to gather testimonials like the confidence in themselves and their poetry compositions, and the realization that their ideas and voices were appreciated, a fun factor with poetry. Those sort of things that the teachers reported back to us.
yeah,
Um,
fantastic.
we were able to also use the audience numbers for our performance event. So even though this funding only covered the workshop phase, the fact that we got 200 people in a regional town to come out and listen to young poets was a pretty big win for us. We also had news stories in local print media on ABC North Coast Radio. And we also looked at things like informal feedback through our social media and newsletters.
Yeah, fantastic. So the viability section, the big fun one, the budget section, obviously. Do you have any tips that you'd like to share for how to prepare a strong and transparent budget? Perhaps what you included in there, or, if you had in-kind support, or these sort of things.
Sure. So I guess most importantly, make sure the artists are paid at a rate that reflects the value of the work that they're doing. So I use the recommended rates from the Australian Society of Authors, because all of our contributing artists are professional writers. I also referred to the Regional Arts Fund arts worker rates, and it can be hard to get current rates. So I guess there's a bit of adjustment there. But that helped for things like when we were in creative team meetings, it was just a basic hourly rate that we could apply to that.
Yeah, fantastic. And did access and inclusion impact the way that you planned your budget? I know personally from experience, being in a regional area can sometimes affect this planning. Did you have to factor in additional, items or costs for your
Mm.
location?
Well, I guess one cost we always have is travel, because there's a lot of distance to cover living in this area. So in previous years, I would have donated my travel expenses as in kind, but I wouldn't recommend that. It needs to be part of the budget. The thing that we didn't factor in, though, was that at the start of 2022, the region got hit by major floods, which completely decimated a lot of the local townships for a good 6 months of the year. So that kind of threw the whole thing into chaos. Um, but it meant that we then worked on other ways that we could provide access to our workshops. And one of the results of that was that we did a lot of upskilling in delivering online workshops
Yeah.
to schools. So that was excellent. And as it happened, it was a very low cost way to deliver. But access and inclusion, in terms of allowing access for young people with disability, that is, I feel, a lot harder to budget accurately. And so, yeah, it's good to leave, as an estimate, about 10% of the budget for that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a big cost and definitely a really good handy hint to include in there. Yeah.
mm,
So, Sarah, perhaps are there any other last tips that you might be able to offer, anyone in the sector who's wishing to apply for a grant? Any sort of practical advice that perhaps you wish that you'd learnt, before you embarked on this journey?
sure. I guess for me, I feel like I've been very lucky, but when I reflect back on what made this program successful, it was building the vision step by step. And it took a lot of investment to begin with, planning and connecting with other organizations and building support. But it was all completely worth it. And I'd say, even if your proposals aren't successful every time, it's never wasted time putting these applications together. It does all come together. Don't be afraid of the budgets, and don't be afraid to ask your supporters for help, because as it happens, the arts are really strongly valued. And when people have an opportunity to get in and help that happen for their local community, they're all for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, Create is always there to help in terms of budget. If there are any questions that people have, always get in touch. On the screen are some methods for connecting with Poets Out Loud and Sarah. So thank you again so much for your time. It's been really wonderful hearing about your project. Should you have any questions about Create's art and culture funding grounds, please just get in touch via the methods that are on the screen now. Thank you again for watching this Creates Connect case study. Thanks.